In the mid-50s, life was most difficult for Black people and all poor people. It was much better for poor white people than for Black people in the South during the 50s, the mid-50s. There was segregation. All of the restaurants were segregated. The hotels and motels were segregated, meaning the fact that Black people were not permitted to live in these hotels. And even in the public courthouse, Blacks could not drink water except from the fountain labeled colored. You could not use the filling stations that was not designated with the restroom for colored. You had a restroom for white males and a restroom for white women, and you had a restroom for colored, meaning that colored people had to use the same restroom, male and female. But the woman's restroom were for white women, even though there was no sign saying except women and men. And the janitor never would visit clean up the restroom for the colored people. And this was an understood fact. It was segregation on the jobs. We were the last to be hired and the first to be fired. In the field of employment, Blacks were not permitted to hold certain jobs in the South, only the menial jobs, domestic workers, and common and ordinary labors. The only professional jobs that were open to Blacks were the ministry, like I am in the field of pastoring a Black church, and the school teaching profession was open because of segregated schools. White teachers didn't normally teach Black students. They would teach Black students in private situations, private institutions. And so you would have principals of schools. We had a few doctors, probably in the whole state of Alabama, where I grew up. We had less than 5 Black doctors. And we didn't do anything but dig ditches, work with some white supervisor that told us everything to do. Life was miserable. Life was most difficult for Black people during those days. We could not vote. We could not sit on the grand juries. We could not sit on the jury, period. There were no Black judges. We had taxation without representation. To put it in another way, I would say the people who live in South Africa today, we at that particular time in the mid-50s were where they are at this particular hour in South Africa. Well, the Emmett Till situation was a horrible incident that took place, but it was commonplace in the state of Mississippi. And so every time the officials would drag the Pearl River, they would come up with bodies of black men and black women who had been drowned or dumped and who had disappeared, and families often were afraid to discuss their absence, and they didn't know what had happened to these people. And nothing was done about the situation. Emmett Till, I remember very, very clearly and very, very vividly as a young man. I wanted to do something about it because this young man who had come from Chicago, I believe, and he was not at all trying to be smart, quote unquote, smart, but he merely visited a grocery store. It had great impact on me because I was greatly disturbed that another black man had been mistreated and murdered and killed, and we were helpless, and we could not do anything about it. At that particular time, we just had to live in fear and with fear because the state of Mississippi would not do anything about it. The federal government would not do anything about it. And we were just hopeless. That was a hopeless case and a helpless case. We lived with the idea that I am glad that it did not happen to me. And it is unfortunate, but we look forward to the day that it would happen to me. I look forward to the day that it would happen to me. And so consequently, it was a horrible, horrible experience. Well, I would like to make it crystal clear at the Holt Street Baptist Church on December 5th, 1955, E.D. Nixon did not set up that meeting. Yours truly, Ralph David Abernathy, set up that meeting. That meeting was filled with thousands of people. And on the outside of the church, there was approximately 5,000 people. And I decided that I would go and ride with Martin Luther King Jr., who had been elected as our leader, president of the Montgomery Improvement Association, and I had named the organization that afternoon in the previous meeting, and we were the leaders of the movement. And as we drew near the Holt Street Baptist Church, Holt Street will seat less than 1,000 persons, and but they were standing in the aisles and everything. When we made our way through the crowd by telling them who we were, and people moved back and let us go through, and we walked to the church, and they stood and clapped and yelled and applauded for 15 minutes. I don't know how the word had reached the church, but they knew that we were their leaders. They knew that Ralph David Abernathy and Martin Luther King were the leaders of the movement. And I had the role of choosing the participants for the program because I was elected the program director in the prior 3 o'clock meeting where Dr. King had been elected as the president of our newly formed Montgomery Improvement Association. And everybody had a cold, and everybody had difficulties reading the Bible, and everybody had other responsibilities. But when we got there and we were all together in that church with 5,000 people standing on the outside, the men and women came to me and started to say, I will be glad to read the scriptures. I will be glad to pray the prayer. Do you still need me and want me? I will be glad to do anything. The fear left, the fear that had shackled us across the years, all left suddenly when we were in that church together. Edie Nixon is a Pullman porter that lived in Montgomery, and he was the civil rights leader and the head of the NAACP in Montgomery, Alabama. And he was living there when I went there as a student and when I pastored the First Baptist Church. And he had been there a very long time. I guess he may have been born there. I don't know. But E.D. Nixon was a courageous person. And but unfortunately, when Rosa Parks was arrested on the December the 1st, 1955, E.D. Nixon bonded her out, got her out of jail, but he had to go away on Friday, December the 2nd, and be away from the city 3 days. So he was away on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and he did not return until Monday. He was at Mrs. Parks' trial where she was found guilty and sentenced, and Attorney Fred D. Gray, who was the attorney for the movement, appealed the case, and we had no idea of continuing our bus boycott beyond Thursday or Friday, 4 or 5 days during that particular week. But Mr. Nixon was instrumental in meeting with me and Reverend French, where we drew up the demands of the bus boycott. But the meeting was set in the basement of the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Church, on Friday evening. And we had decided to have this mass meeting in the heart of the Black community. The people decided not to come to the First Baptist Church, which is the largest church in Montgomery, but they decided to against First Baptist because First Baptist is downtown. And so they wanted to be in the Black community totally. And we felt much more secure. We had never seen a crowd like that crowd before. I had never seen a crowd like that crowd before. I thought some prominent Black person had died, and the people had gathered, or some prominent Black person had been in an accident. I thought that tragedy had come to the community. Only a wave of freedom, a new birth of freedom had come to the community. And it took Dr. King and I for 15 minutes to make our way through the crowd, telling the people whom we were. And on the inside of the church, I have already told you that it took 15 minutes before the people would sit down and become quiet and let us begin the meeting. And I can tell you the name of the first song that we sang. It was "What a Fellowship, What a Joy Divine, Leaning on the Everlasting Arms." Martin Luther King was a small man. He was short like me, about the same height, and he weighed something about 165 or 70 pounds. He was not quite as stout as I am at this particular time, but he was we were about the same size during those days in the movement. We were known as the Civil Rights Twins, and we were buddies, the closest of associates. And he was just a lovely and wonderful person. He was short in physical stature, but tall in terms of eloquence and spirituality and life in general. Well, it was 381 days that the boycott lasted, and I saw him develop and grow. Dr. King evolved during this period of the bus boycott that lasted for 381 days, from a local pastor into an international spokesman for freedom, justice, and equality for all mankind. He even organized the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and became a national leader, but he didn't stop there. He even moved in the field of international affairs of the state, and began to speak out against the godless and senseless war in Vietnam. Yes, his leadership was different in Albany, Georgia, from the leadership that he displayed in Montgomery, Alabama. They had their own local leaders in Albany. Dr. Debbie G. Anderson was there, and he was well qualified and well able to lead the movement. But he wanted Dr. King and myself there as co-leaders of the movement. And so consequently, we had to strategize and work in such a way to keep the local leadership alive and let them announce many of the decisions. We had given a great thought to going to Albany because of the problems that existed there. There was a movement taking place already in Albany. And so consequently, we went into an already organized situation. And Dr. Anderson, after Dr. King made the speech, announced that we would be staying over, and Dr. King would be leading the march the next day. And because they had already begun marching, they had marched probably a month or so, but they could not get much done accomplished. But on that march, the Monday following Dr. King's speech, thousands of people marched and were jailed. And that really marked the beginning of the Albany movement. Well, he was a very, very fine person in my estimation, and carried out his responsibilities as justly as he could. He was a tall, fat, jovial person that was as nonviolent as possible, especially when the eyes of other people were looking at him. I understand that there was another side which I did not know about, but I understand that he could become brutal and mean to the poor black people under situations that nobody was looking at him. But he was a very, very fine person. I like Mr. Pritchett very, very much. He was a segregationist, a sophisticated segregationist. He, by no standard, was he an integrationist, but he believed in carrying out the orders of the community and of the city government in Albany, but he was a human being, and at heart, he meant well, I think, even though he was not wanting you to be totally free. Well, I do not agree that the Albany movement had the greatest music. I think that the Birmingham movement had the greatest music of all. We did develop a great singing group led on by one of the fine young women there, but it was good, it was moving, and it was most inspiring. It was good. I remember her so very, very well. She has a tremendous voice. She would sing with the Harris girls. She didn't have a great choir like in Birmingham. I had no alternative but to come out the last time I was arrested in Albany because some person unknown to me paid the fee, the fine, and that messed up my plans and the plans of Dr. King. We were always jailed together, and so consequently, when Mr. Pritchett came down and unlocked the door, and he said, you may go now, and Dr. King asked why, and he said, somebody has paid your fine, and we do not know until this day who paid the fine. I do not know. I can only say that it slows it down. If you have the goal and if you have the eyes on the prize, you will not give up until the system is changed, till the problems are solved in the community, until your goals are fully accomplished. I definitely believe Mr. Pritchett was able to slow down the movement in Albany because of his attitude, but it was an institutionalized system of racism, and he was only one man. He didn't make all of the laws. He was merely the chief of police. And so consequently, he could not run the toll system. He could not be the mayor of the city. He could not be the governor of the state. He could not be the president of the United States of America. So he may have been in charge of some things in the system, but the court system was unjust, and he did not have any say-so about that. And people lived in the community, and he didn't have anything to say about how one neighbor would treat another neighbor. I would say Mississippi was the worst place in the South, but Birmingham was an awful city. We called it Birmingham. There had been so many bummings until we changed the name to Birmingham. We often said that Birmingham was the worst city this side of Johannesburg, South Africa, even back there during those days. But a whole state, the state of Alabama, was not Birmingham. And so consequently, the whole state of Mississippi was bad. For instance, in Mobile, Alabama, it was very, very liberal considered during those days. Huntsville, Alabama was very, very liberal because these are cities that are made up out of cosmopolitan people who are constantly coming from the northern areas of our country, the eastern areas of the country. And so as a state, Mississippi was the worst, and as a city, Birmingham was one of the worst cities in the state of Alabama. Well, I was prepared on the daily basis for whatever would come. I was prepared to accept it because I was totally committed to justice and equality, and I knew what I had to do to change the system, and I had made up in my mind that before I would be a slave, I would be buried in my grave and go on home to my Lord and be free. So if death met me, I had paid my dues. I sought to treat my wife and children right. I believe that I am the best husband in the world. I believe that I am the finest daddy that ever walked the streets of America or of the world. And so I lived like that each and every day. Well, it was Good Friday, and we went thinking and feeling like Christ, I guess, felt on his Good Friday when he surrendered and when he was crucified, when he was killed. And I was prepared to suffer with him and suffer with Martin Luther King Jr. We had the backing of thousands of people all across America, and thousands of people right there in Birmingham, Alabama. Thousands of people there in the 16th Street Baptist Church of Birmingham, Alabama. And we were not alone. We were together. But Bull Connor pulled that trick. For the first time, Martin Luther King and I were segregated. He put him in solitary confinement on the 6th floor and put me in solitary confinement on the 5th floor. And so consequently, we could not talk to each other. And so he wrote the letter from the Birmingham jail. If we had been together talking to each other, maybe we would not have that eloquent and profound letter from the Birmingham jail. Bull Connor discovered that we drew strength from each other because I always carried in my inside coat pocket a Bible, a small Bible, and I always repeated my Psalms, the 27th number of the Psalms, every time I was arrested. Martin would say, "Ralph, read your Psalms. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? When the wicked, even mine enemies, came up on me to eat up my flesh, they stumbled and fell," and so forth and so forth. And it closes with, "I would have fainted unless I believed to see the goodness of the Lord and the land of the living. Wait on the Lord. Be of good courage, and he shall strengthen thine heart. Wait, I say, on the Lord." We had a good time. we had the assurance that we had the power, even though the policemen had the guns and the billy clubs. We would always fast during our stay in jail, and it became very, very difficult, particularly in Albany, when the women would cook cakes and pies and fried chicken and bring it to us in large quantities, and it was very, very tempting, but we would always fast, and we would always have devotional services each morning, and we would fight and work to have exercise. We wanted to keep our bodies physically fit. And even though we were often in solitary confinement, especially in Birmingham, but the lawyers finally won for us the right to be moved twice per day, once in the morning and once in the afternoon, to an area in the large room, and the policemen in charge would not let us talk to each other. When we were together, Martin Luther King and I, in the recreational room, we had to develop a sign language because the policemen were so mean and cruel until they would not permit us to greet each other, even talk to each other. Well, we were much aware of the FBI, and we knew that they were taping our hotel rooms and bugging our houses and automobiles, and we were very much aware of the fact that they were monitoring our telephone calls. So we developed a code system. For instance, if we were talking about our wives, women were always institutions. Oh boy, Martin would say, Ralph, that is a great institution. And we developed words that meant certain things. And we were not doing anything wrong, and we didn't have anything to hide. And so if they wanted to bug our rooms, and I remember very, very clearly that the Willard Hotel in Washington cooperated with the FBI in Washington, D.C., and so we just decided that we were not going to try to hide. They could do whatever they wanted to do, but they would not be able to turn us around. Well, we felt very, very bad about it. Very, very bad about it, because we looked on the federal government as being our friend. And when they did not respond, we were terribly upset. Later, in later years, we attacked the federal government, And that was not until after the death and assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. He did it in a marvelous and magnificent fashion. He was an excellent father and an excellent husband, and he would take Coretta to Mrs. King to the hospital, and Mrs. King is a very, very strong person, and if she needed to go home without him, she understood. She knew that what he was engaged in, and he was just. They had it together, and we had made up in our mind that we had a job to do. Well, I gave to him, I think, strength and courage. And God blessed me to have that strength and courage. He wanted me by his side at all times. And I was by his side, even until the last, when the bullet was fired in his body on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel. I was there. I was the first person to get to him. And I comforted him and cuddled him in my arms and said to him, "Martin, don't worry. It will be all right. It will be all right." And his eyes were staring and turning, and he could not utter a word, but he was upset. But finally, he heard me. I'm convinced that he heard me, and he knew that it would be all right. It would be all right. And he relaxed. I could tell you about time and time again when I had to comfort him. And he turned to me and expected from me that comfort. And I tried to be that consoling force, always with him and supporting the ministry and the work of Martin Luther King. He was my Paul, and I was his Timothy. And we worked hand in hand. And he often said to me, David, which is my real name, David, I could never have been to you what you have been to me. And I would say, Martin and Michael, which was his name, Michael, just to be second to you is enough for me. I know I do not want any glory, but I would be terribly upset if anybody took my place in the life of Martin Luther King Jr. We were together at all times. Even when we were not together in person, we were together in spirit. We thought alike. I received a call early in the morning of the Birmingham of the 6th Street Baptist Church, and I was terribly upset because they told me that 4 little girls, while studying a Sunday school class had been killed. And this news came to me while I was in the pulpit of the West 100th Street Baptist Church in Atlanta, Georgia. You know, Birmingham is on Central Time, and we are on Eastern Standard Time. And we are 1 hour ahead of Birmingham. Birmingham has always been behind time. And so consequently, when it was Sunday school time in Birmingham, it was worship time in Atlanta. So I was in the pulpit. I left the pulpit and received a call and discovered this awful tragedy. And I returned to the congregation and called for prayer. Prayer for the families of these beautiful young girls who had been slain. Prayer for their slayers. Yes, I returned to the sanctuary of West 100th Street Baptist Church, and I called for prayer. I asked the people to pray for the families of these 4 beautiful young people that had been slain while studying the Sunday school lesson in the 16th Street Baptist Church. I called on the congregation to pray for the perpetrators of these vicious acts. And I called upon the people to rededicate themselves and pray for a sick nation that would tolerate acts of injustice like that, and pray for the President of the United States that he would be more courageous, and pray for the Justice Department so that they would always be our friend, the friend of freedom and equality. Well, they didn't use guns because of our teachings. Martin Luther King Jr. Held to the fact that an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth would end up with a blind society and a toothless generation. And he would say in most of his speeches, every time, Jesus says to every potential Peter, put down thy sword, for he that fighteth by the sword must perish by the sword. And he would go on to say, not by might nor by power, but by my spirit, saith the Lord of hosts. Well, I don't think that it was much controversy. John Lewis, just speaking for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee as its president, John Lewis just wanted to say some things in the script that was much more radical than Roy Wilkins of the NAACP and Whitney Young of the National Urban League thought was necessary. And they solved the problem, and everybody was pleased about it, I guess, other than the press. Greatest day in my life. I remember so vividly after that day, Martin Luther King and I went back to the grounds about 6 or 7 o'clock that evening, and where 250,000 people had sat that day. There was nothing but the wind blowing the leftover programs and scattered litter across the way, across the reflection pool. The wind was moving and blowing and blowing and keeping music. And we were in communication with the great emancipator, Abraham Lincoln. And we went up and took a good look at his statue once again. And we were so proud of the fact that no violence had taken place that day. And we were so pleased. But this beautiful scene of the wind dancing in the sands of the Lincoln Memorial, I will never forget. This was the greatest day of my life. I think that it has accomplished a great deal. I think that it first established a visibility in this nation that the struggle was nearing a close, that people were coming together, and all the organizations could stand and fight and struggle and stand together. I think that the next thing it demonstrated that there was a unity in the Black community for the cause of freedom and justice. And I think that it made it palpably clear that we do not have to use violence to achieve the goals which we were seeking. And it made way for the Birmingham movement, and it made way for the Selma movement. I think it told the nation, you had better get your house in order.
C.T. Fitzpatrick says that they kept agreeing on solutions, and the Black leaders, you were one of them, would take it to say they'd have to take it to the congregation and it would fall through. And he maintains, Fitzpatrick does, this was just a way for you to continue raising money. So I guess I'm asking what were the meetings like, and responding to what Fitzpatrick says as well.
Well, the meetings with the commission were simply meetings where we came together trying to get the commissioners, the three of them, and the bus officials to bring it in to the bus boycott. We were not even asking for integration of the buses. Our first demand was to have more courtesy on the part of the bus drivers, to eliminate calling our women out of their names, and cows and niggers and things like that, and pulling off, after taking our dimes And during the rush hours, blacks were required to put the dime in the slot and get off of the bus, and they would often pull off without opening the back door for them to board the bus and take the dime with them. And often people had doors closed on them, and they were drugged down the street a distance until they could get rid of the coat of the jacket. And so more courtesy on the part of the bus drivers. And the second question had to deal with the seating policy. Blacks would begin in the rear and whites would begin in the front. And wherever they would meet, that would be the dividing line. Mayor Gales was a very, very passive individual, but the meetings were always tense because Dr. King was the spokesman. He did not seek to respect that fact, and that made for a lot of tension. He wanted to make me the leader, Reverend Say the leader. Pastors who had been there in the community far longer than Dr. King. And we could not solve the problems because they were not willing to give in. They were not willing to cooperate. And we could have solved the problems because all they had to do was change the law and make it permissible for black people to ride on the buses under these conditions. The bus company officials could have solved these problems.
When did you think you learned that you couldn't compromise with segregation in this instance, and that segregationists couldn't compromise with you? And was this the most important lesson of the boycott?
The most important lesson was that segregation had no place in the life of America, and we were not going to compromise. We and the system, the leaders of the system, was not going to compromise. So consequently, we needed a ruling from the United States Supreme Court. Well, there were not as many women active as there were men, but I will agree with you. I will agree that it was much more easier for women to be respected and to be involved in the movement than for black males to be involved in the movement. Well, I thought it was be a successful campaign because at this point in my life, I had become terribly committed and determined, and I was going to back home. Selma was the closest fairly large city to my native Linden, Alabama. And the people that ran Selma knew me personally. And my sisters and my brothers were all employed in the school system of Selma, not Selma, but of Marengo County, Alabama. And so the marches came from my native Marengo County, Alabama. Well, that the officials had bugged the church and for the mass meetings, and they could hear what was taking place in the meetings, and I named that the doohickey. And so consequently, I would preach to the doohickey, and I would talk into the doohickey. I would locate it, and they thought that we could not find it. But we were not afraid, and we had been totally emancipated from all fear, and we were determined to win our God-given rights and freedom.
On March 7th, which later became known as Bloody Sunday, you and Dr. King were in Atlanta when Hosea Williams called and said, listen, I have these people here and they want to march. Can you describe for me, the conversation that you had with Dr. King about what to do about that situation?
Well, first, the conversation with Hosea Williams. Hosea Williams called my church and said to me, Dr. Abernathy, Mr. Pastor, you are the only person that can get Dr. King to let us march. We had advertised that we would march on this particular Sunday, and so consequently the injunction had come down, and we decided to abide by the injunction. But Jose wanted to break the injunction, and he told me he had thousands of people. I know he was exaggerating, and so I called the Ebenezer Church and asked for Dr. King, and they put Dr. King on, and he said, Ralph, what do you suggest? And I said, well, I would suggest that you let them go on and march. And he said, okay, I have to go in church now and begin the service, but you do whatever you want to do. And so consequently, I called Jose back, and so I informed him to go ahead and march his thousands and thousands of people that he had. And so consequently, when I got out of church, I heard on the radio that the people had been brutally beaten in Selma. and Jose Williams even had been hospitalized, and John Lewis, the leaders of that march. Well, it was enjoyable and it was tension-filled all at the same time. We knew that victory was in sight. And we also experienced a great deal of hostility because we had to march on one side of the road and of the highway, and the cars had to move on the other side of the highway. And we had a great deal of fun, and a great deal of profanity was yelled at from the passing cars. And the old farmers came out, mostly white people, and they looked at us with utter disdain. But we knew that the victory was in sight.
What about the black people along the way?
They would come and join the march, and they were invited, and we invited the white people to join the march also. And strangely enough, many of those white persons did join up with the march. Yes, we were very, very much aware of what was taking place in Washington, and we monitored that, and we were eagerly looking forward to the passage of the Voting Rights Bill, and President Johnson almost but sang the anthem of the Civil Rights Movement when he said, "We shall overcome. Deep in our hearts, we do believe that we shall overcome." This was before a joint session of the House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate. We were glad, and we knew that we had won the victory. We got the information from congressmen, and we would steal away and look at the television, and Dr. King was an avid news person, and we had reporters right there on the scene, and they would keep us informed, and he would read every newspaper that was published in the country, and people had radios who were a part of the march, and we would stop every night and pitch tent after having walked about 15 miles, and it was just a glorious victory march from Selma to Montgomery. Well, I didn't have that feeling because I do not agree with the fact that the tension that existed between SCLC and the Student Nonviolent Coordinated Committee was much of a problem. We considered the students our friends, and that organization made a most worthy contribution, and there was no evil spirits and broken hearts. We were just all together in love. And if we were not together in love, we certainly came together when the national television personalities like Harry Belafonte and Joan Baez all came to the St. Jude grounds on the outskirts of Montgomery, Alabama, and entertained us on that night just before we went into Montgomery, Alabama, and to the state capitol.
Jim Clark.
Jim Clark was an awful, mean, cruel, fat man, white man.
Wilson Baker.
Wilson Baker was a tall, fat, red-skinned, but I felt that he was a decent person.
William Anderson, Dr. William Anderson.
Dr. William Anderson was tall, handsome, black, very, very educated, very trained, and very articulate.
Fred Shuttlesworth.
Fred Shuttlesworth was the bravest man I have ever met in the movement, and he was very, very outspoken, very, very courageous, and a fine person, a founder of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference.
Andy Young.
Andy Young was, and he is a very, very fine person that draws love from me. And he is loved by white people and black people. He has a lot of personality, a lot of warmth, but he is kind of canny, kind of sneaky. He is a lovely person in many, many respects.
Bull Connor.
Bull Connor was the most evil man I have ever had in dealings with, but we changed him from a bull into a steer.
Jim Foreman.
Jim Foreman was a mischievous lad, very, very kind, but very, very mischievous, and would try to provoke you and bring out the worst in you while still laughing.
John Lewis.
John Lewis was a dedicated person, a fine person, a sincere person, very dedicated.
A. Philip Randolph.
A. Philip Randolph was the dean of the black leadership in America. He was a courageous man, a beautiful man, one of the great stalwart leaders of this nation.
Frederick Reese.
Frederick Reese was a very, very fine person. He was tall and not that handsome, but a very fine person to work with.
Mrs. Amelia Boynton.
She was a very tall lady and a very nice woman. A very lovely person.
We got the spirit from listening to you talk about it, and I wonder if you could just sing a little bit of that that first song, that first meeting in the Holy Spirit Baptist Church.
What a fellowship, what a joy divine, leaning on the everlasting arms. What a blessed peace, what a soul in mine, leaning on the everlasting arms. Leaning on Jesus, leaning on Jesus, safe and secure from all along. Leaning on Jesus, leaning on Jesus, leaning on the everlasting arms. What have I to dread? What have I to fear? Leaning on the everlasting arms. I have blessed peace with my Lord so near, leaning on the everlasting arms. Leaning on Jesus, leaning on Jesus, safe and secure from all along. Leaning on Jesus, leaning on Jesus, leaning on the everlasting arms. Back to the first one. What have I to dread? What have I to fear? Leaning on the everlasting arms. I have blessed peace with my Lord so near, leaning on the everlasting arms. I got my words mixed up on the first singing. I hope you will use the second verse.